frequently used one is split file, splitting the file so that you can get various output sections that are specific to various categories in your variable. Transform, I use this quite often. In fact, the compute, whoops, I'm actually in the one that I opened up, which isn't going to let me. The compute is like a calculator, and it allows you to calculate various new variables, and I'll create a video on that separately. But if I had one item, a variable here and a variable here, and I wanted to create a third variable called the sum of these two variables, well, I could do that in the transform compute variable utility. There's a lot of other useful options in here when you have to recode data as well. Now, this section here of SPSS is the main reason why SPSS exists, I would argue, is to do a large number of relatively sophisticated and complicated statistical analyses. And a very commonly used one would be something like a t-test, where we want to compare independent sample means associated with what we hypothesize to be independent samples. And we have paired samples t-test, one way ANOVA. You may have heard of these statistical analyses in passing in reading papers and the like. Regression, a large number of commonly used statistical analyses here. So SPSS is a comprehensive statistical package because it does a large number of very commonly used statistical analyses. Now, in addition to doing statistical analyses, we also often want to do charts or graphs. And SPSS also allows the capability, or has the capability, of doing a large number of basic and semi-sophisticated charts, and that's in a separate menu-driven option. Utilities is probably less frequently used than other options, probably more advanced users. Add-ons, not much to talk about there. Window, and then your help section, where you actually can get help about the various procedures that SPSS can do. Now, I'm going to very, very briefly, or very basically, do an analysis just to show you what the output looks like very briefly. All right, and I don't expect you to understand what I'm doing here precisely, but I'm just creating a group variable and an item variable, and we'll actually look at what the output looks like. I'm going to do an independent samples t-test on these data. All right, so that's my grouping variable, and I'm going to define that as a 0 and a 1. And whoops, I actually made a mistake there. This is my grouping variable. Define 0, 1, good. And then I'm going to put that in my test targets, or dependent variable. And I get output here, and this is what the output of a t-test looks like. I'm not going to interpret what this means. In fact, I've got another video that talks about the t-test, but this is where we interpret the output of our analyses, and this is where it takes knowledge of statistics, assumptions of statistics, and how to interpret a p-value and a t-value, etc. It's all in the output viewer that we get that. So we've got the data viewer, we've got the variable view, and then we've got output. And this is also where the charts reveal themselves. So if you go into charts, and I wanted to create a histogram of my dependent variable, it's going to look fairly nonsensical, but this is a very ugly histogram. I have another video on histograms that you might want to check out. But that's really the basics of SPSS. So once you know about data view, variable view, and that you've got to manipulate these various menus in order to facilitate analyses, you're really well on your way. I'm only going to point out one more thing. In Analyze, when I did that independent samples t-test, there's also an option to paste. And what that means is that you can paste the syntax. Every analysis you do in SPSS through the menu actually has a series of commands that are being built up in the background of SPSS, and SPSS executes those commands in the syntax file. Although unless you click paste, you don't see that syntax. And this is the syntax here that SPSS creates or that is produced by that menu-driven utility that I did for the t-test, and I could save this for another time and run it very easily by running it through here. So I just wanted to very briefly point out that in addition to the menu-driven options to do analysis, you also have syntax options. And in fact, there are more options and more capabilities in SPSS through the syntax, because not everything that SPSS can do can be done in the menu-driven options. And that's an important point to make. And it also, if you need to create a large number of analyses that are going to be repeated frequently, then it can be very useful to use syntax. Anyway, I hope you learned something about the basics of SPSS in this video tutorial, and I'll catch you next time.